Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at Chipko Fantasy Rules 2nd Edition, and it's going to be a pretty in-depth look. This battle is set in the Mineria world of Divine Right. In the north, the dwarves of Isles Noir have been having an epidemic of liver failure, in spite of all the alcohol that they use as medicine. The attempts to marry his daughter off were rebuffed in spite of her luxurious beard. The Elf King wanted nothing to do with her, and he's been reduced to one army. Meanwhile, his archenemy over in the Nithmere Mountains, Zorn, has been putting some troops together and threatening to march across the north. He could recruit Eimer, but then he would have to defend all those places. So with this as situation, and the orcs and goblins marching on his little city, he comes up with a little bit of a plan because he notices this sacred area up here that the barbarians might want to protect. Luckily, he draws the card. Oh, yeah. That is the fiercest warrior for the barbarians. He sends its ambassador up for a very dangerous meeting and attempts to recruit.
Blood has been running through our veins.
These guys could do the trick. So there they meet at the Sacred Stones. His barbarian mercenaries, led by Jalut Wolfheart, against the goblins and orcs of the Nithmere Mountains. Before the game, you have to roll for omens. There were none. We're also going to roll to see who outscouts the other. The Nithmere Mountain goblins had an awful lot of light cavalry, so they decisively won that roll, and they made the barbarians deploy first, and there's their deployment. The standing stones are just scenic. We have a forest over here. We have another one back here. This is what the deployment looked like when they were done. We're going to go over the units and let you know how they were. Over here we have 4 heavy cavalry. Chipko goes by stand. I'm using 80mm squares. We have a hero with them. He has the mark of evil, so he calls his fear. Now, next back here, you'll notice these 2 units are battle wagons. They're mammoths, but they're on double-sized bases, so what's called a juggernauted unit. It goes by building blocks. So those are 1x2 juggernauts, and they're both elite, so they're a pretty tough unit. One of them is being ridden by the wizard for the barbarians, and that is Snake Plissken. Back here we have a block of heavy chariots. Pretty formidable unit. There's 4 of them, but you'll notice that the one on the left is juggernauted, so it's a 1x2 juggernaut, making it a lot more powerful. Now, it also has an interesting little character here. That is a character called an anti-hero. It represents an incompetent in-law that the orcs purchased and put on that unit. Up front, we have 5 units of small monsters, in this case, ice trolls, pretty nasty unit. Now, there are 12 barbarian hand weapons. They're grouped into 2 masses of 6. In the middle here is Jalut Wolfheart. He's got his army standard. He's also got an exceptional weapon. Back here we have the siblings, 3 frost giants with paralyzing gaze because their breath freezes you in its tracks. And over here we have another battle wagon, which is just a plain standard battle wagon. And finally, there's a unit of rangers. They could have deployed in any terrain. They chose to deploy in the forest over there to kind of hold things up. As the orcs form up, let me tell you one of my favorite things about fantasy rules. You will never have another obsolete miniature. And you also never have a reason not to buy anything. You can buy every single Kickstarter you see. You can 3D print anything you want. Because it's so flexible, I can't think of anything that you can't put in there that is of a fantasy, sci-fi, horror type genre. And that's what I really like about it. Because I like to collect models, not just specific ones that are kind of railroaded into buying for the particular, game that you're playing. It's really been great. So now that we got the orcs deployed, I'm going to run down the line, let you look at them, and then we're going to take a look at what they have and start this battle up. Not surprisingly, there are a lot more of them. They will outnumber most opponents, so there's a lot of them. So the strength of the orcs is in their missile troops, their cavalry, and their light troops. The strength of the barbarians is in their monsters and battle wagons. So just keep that in mind as we go along here. So we're going to start on the one end there. We have some skirmishers. They have bow fire. They can mass together and take out anything. Back here is a fanatic, a giant killer, or pretty much an anything killer. It's a crapshoot with that thing. Back here, 6 chariots plus a juggernauted one in the middle. So that's a powerful mess. They have their own juggernauted mammoth, and their earth shaman is riding that. His stabmaster Arson is his name. Up here, we have 9 hand weapon units. Both ends of the line are anchored by elite troops. So that's a pretty solid line. In the middle is Blackie Lawless, the general. He is he's always going to be my orc general whenever I play this army. Back here, 6 heavy cavalry units. So just a lot of powerful, fast troops, but they're being kept in reserve. Over here is a battery of 4 catapults, heavy artillery with indirect fire. This block is 3 mobs of goblins on 2x2 juggernauts. Over here is a bunch of light cavalry coming through the backside of the woods, kind of come flanking around, and I saved the best for last. Hidden in this forest is one nasty little piece of work. It is a spider, so it's a large monster, and it has the following abilities. It has grapple because of its webs, and it has poison. So it can kill anything if it grapples it. On the right side of your screen, you're going to notice the orcs are very weak other than that spider hanging in the woods. First spell of the game, Snake Plissken flies the female frost giant across the board and puts her into the artillery battery. That artillery is in big trouble at the moment right now. That's a pretty good move. They tried to dispel it, but it didn't work. The rest of the movements for the barbarians, they're just moving ahead pretty much aggressively. Chipko has a really nice intuitive movement system. One of the things I like, I ran this at conventions many times back in around 2000. By the 3rd turn, people know how to play the game. So here they are. They move forward. They captured the terrain objective already in the middle of the field. You notice the trolls are starting to outpace their support a little bit. And now here comes the orcs. They're going to just come up and match them troop for troop. I can see some things developing with all these chariots moving up that it's going to get a little crazy, but we'll see how that works out. And the mobs turn around and tackle the giant, so the giant has to turn to face them. Now she's got some problems. She's faced with these 3 huge mobs, but the mobs have to finish her off before the hand weapons come up and catch them in the rear. Interesting little choice there, risky decision. You notice that they're moving up the light cavalry and the spider to try to protect the rear of the mobs. So here we go. The trolls are sitting there, and Blackie Lawless moves up to square off against them. Over here, the light cavalry are going to try to hold off these other troops until the mobs finish off the giant. And then he moves up his cavalry to support. It's looking pretty dramatic over here, as Gandalf said, the deep breath before the plunge. The number of charge bonuses stacked on this side of the table between the mammoths and all the chariots is insane. It's like 2 diesels heading straight towards each other at full speed. I almost wanted to go to the workshop and get some safety glasses before this was resolved. The troops are almost too densely packed to deploy and be useful. It's just going to be a smash. So after the wizards dueled it out, they're ready to begin movement for turn 2. There is no specific magic phase. You cast spells whenever you want on either player's turn. So you can get into times when spells are flying and then other times when they're not. I think they exhausted their magic pools. The spider had him creeped out here on the right-hand side for a little bit because I really pointed out, but his trolls just went in. They didn't care. Had to take some fear tests. A couple of them failed. So the line got a little shaky there, but I think the trolls are going to be in trouble. They're really nasty, but they don't have any real standing power. The infantry should rally up and be able to hold them up pretty good. So the cavalry just moves right up. If you have a charge bonus and you get charged by someone else, you both get your bonus. So it kind of eliminates the need to worry about how far away you are. They're just squared up. But the chariots have a lot higher bonus than the cavalry. I give the edge to the orcs there. You notice that 3 units failed their fear test and they're marked with a demoralization. So it's on to combat, and you can watch them roll the combat here. The demoral is from the fear. You can just watch the orc line just buckle and fall back. They're just not rolling too well, and they're just falling back in the center. They have to rally up and come back, but right now they're on the back foot. This is going to have some implications later on. You can see the two trolls on the end lost their combat, so they're marked with a demoralization, and generally monsters don't rally too well. But the line's broken up, so the Orc army standard will not affect the units that were pushed back. Shooting comes before movement. These wolf riders are in an excellent position. They're protected by bad terrain, which battle wagons don't like, and they're able to mass fire on this battle wagon. There is no reason that this thing should live. They just had terrible luck. They didn't do a thing to it, and they took their shot, but they turned around and moved back to safety. So the orcs start to move, and you'll see this little spider try to come out and attack that giant, but wait. He got hit with frost breath and got frozen in place and was not allowed to move forward. That was pretty clever because that's big, because he couldn't grapple, he couldn't poison. Now he's stuck in the woods and he's frozen in place. I think this really pissed off Blackie Lawless, because at this point the kidding around was pretty much over. They didn't play around, just smashed in with all their chariots. And then the entire line of infantry looped around the side and attacked. They exposed their flanks, but that didn't matter. They were going to take those trolls out and kill them. I think they were just on a mission to kill everything at this point. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the game, I indicated that this juggernauted chariot on the barbarian side had been given a hero by the orcs. It's an anti-hero. It's a -2/-2 hero. Basically, he makes things worse. That's your incompetent in-law. So the flanking maneuver worked pretty decent. Blackie Lawless was able to get in and apply his bonus, put a demoralization on the trolls. But the orcs just were not having good luck. There's 150 models there facing one woman who's barely clothed, and she beat them. Fantasy Rules uses an opposed die roll system with modifiers, and it's very interactive. You're rolling off against your opponent. You take wounds, three wounds, you're dead. You get a chance to rally it off. It's a very good system. So after you've taken your second demoralization, you have to fall back. And if you get your score is doubled, you're killed outright. But for powerful units, they generally don't get killed outright right away, especially big units. However, there are some exceptions. As you can see, the mob in the middle got just wiped out. Each turn you keep track of wounds and kills done, and then you determine a winner for each turn, and the loser has his morale dropped by 1. This video, I'm not keeping track of everything that happens, and in fact, there's certain little things that you can miss if you blink it. Throughout this game, they were dueling it out with magic, and if you can see right here, boom, that giant fell into quicksand. The Earth Shaman on the orc side got a good spell off and killed it outright. Here's a shot of the video of this time during the battle, and you can see this is about turn 2 or 3. We've got some pretty established battle lines. There are going to be a lot of die rolls to get this resolved, so not one die roll will cause your whole army to flee. You're constantly rallying, you're constantly fighting. This was taken before that left giant actually fell into the quicksand. Looking at the center brawl, you can see that the hand weapon orcs had recovered nicely. 9 units are still on the board. 2 of them are demoralized. The trolls have a total of 6 demoralizations on them. Only 1 unit is unscathed, and they're being crushed. And Jalut and the hand weapons are still 1 turn away. In Fantasy Rules, you lose orders as your army takes losses each individual turn. So far, the orcs have lost every turn. But the barbarians still have plenty of moves. He's able to move all his troops up. He decides to send the giant in to tackle the spider, but he's moving up pretty good. I think this is one of those pivotal turns where luck really starts twisting over. So we found out that when you charge someone, they don't get to grapple. So the spider did not get to attempt to grapple, but he did manage to put a poison on the giant. I put a couple of poison markers on the base of the spider so we can remember that he has that ability. So combat during this turn saw a lot of crazy things happening. The trolls refused to go away. They just rolled exceptionally well. And not only that, they also started rallying back up. The frost giant in the top there, the female, decided to run away because she was demoralized. But in addition to that, we had all of these chariot battles that were just even up fights, and in each case, the barbarians won. You can see they actually punched a hole, and the others are reeling backwards and falling apart. This was just kind of, a turn of just really bad series of combat rolls and a lot of really good rally rolls on the part of the barbarians. Fantasy Rules has dozens and dozens of rolls: rally rolls, combat rolls, spell rolls, dispel rolls. Every single one of them seems critical, but they're not because there's just so many of them. It generally, if there's a trend of a lot of bad luck in a row, it works out. You can see the orc line is just busted up and the hand weapons are coming in. Trolls totally tore in pieces. So the chariots on the left are doing pretty good for the barbarians too. Interestingly enough, I originally said that the right side of your screen, the orcs looked very weak. That's actually where they're doing the best. The rest of their strong stuff is just getting pulverized, and it's been an interesting game. This giant has been demoralized, and so it can't charge into combat. It keeps trying to rally, so it's trying to hide behind the artillery until it rallies up. It doesn't rally and eventually gets hit with an earthquake spell, has to retreat and can't, so it's taken off the table. This is what it looks like. You can see that on the left side the orcs are being pushed back. They have almost no chance to recapture the center. And 3 chariots from the barbarian side destroyed 3 identical chariots from the orcs, emerged from it completely unscathed, ready to smash into the final line of reserve of the orcs, which is their heavy cavalry. Fantasy Rules has a lot of quirky things, such as the anti-hero I mentioned earlier. In the 2 chariots that are juggernauted smashing into each other, if you remember, the barbarians had this anti-hero attached to theirs, who weakened that unit enough so that its counterpart could destroy it. However, as luck would have it, that anti-hero then defected and joined the other side. So now the orcs are stuck with their own anti-hero that they originally purchased to weaken the barbarians, and now it's ruining their juggernauted chariot itself. Just one more of a series of paper cuts. I first stumbled across these rules lying on a counter in a gaming store in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania. My friend and I had gone down there to play some Warhammer. And I typically buy a lot of odd rules, and I thought, I'll give it a try, just judging from the artwork on the front cover and the description on the back. And it really took off in our area. We promoted the heck out of it because I live real close to the HMGS, the Each conventions, and back then I was attending them. So we ran a lot of games there. We ran a lot of games at the store, and actually our store owner purchased about 20 copies. We had a nice little community playing the game. I think 2 things really led to its drop in popularity. Number one, it went to a PDF only format for Chipko version 3. So my store could no longer sell copies. He was no longer as interested in having us in there promoting it. And a lot of people at that time, this was, 1999, 2000, something like that. A lot of people at that time didn't seem to want to pay for PDFs. And I prefer a book myself. And in fact, if second edition had only been PDF, I would have never found one lying on a countertop in a game store. So it faded away. The second reason would have been that Warhammer 6th edition dropped around this time, and it came out with Ravening Hordes, which is a complete reset. And we rebased our armies back to Warhammer. And I started playing Warhammer, and it lasted for a little while before it was ruined again. So that's the way it went. I'm going to zoom in on this spot. Interesting play and counterplay. Snake flies his mammoth behind enemy lines, determined to charge his opposing wizard in the rear. That opposing wizard was unable to counter the spell, so instead he cast his own spell, opening up a chasm in the ground, preventing the mammoth from charging him. Now, you notice that in this image you can see that all of these orc units are demoralized. Their line is just failing, and they're unable to rally. As command falls apart, smaller units don't have an order to move, so these fanatics just didn't really get to do anything the whole game. One of the things that I really enjoyed and found very charming was a little bit of fiction that were sprinkled throughout the rule book that kind of illustrated some rules, but also was just fun. And whoever wrote it did an excellent job. They did the little story about the elf trying to come up with a taunt, which was used to illustrate the taunt ability. It just was, like I said, I really, really liked that part of it. And I don't think it's really necessarily a rule, but it was enough to spark your imagination. There is not a set of lore in here. There's not an 86 volume set on the Horus Heresy. It's just, this is a sandbox, but there are 50 army lists in there, which makes it so that any ancient or medieval historical list can be used in this system. And in fact, I just watched Little Wars TV play a game of Age of Hannibal, which is a modification of this system specifically for historicals. I mentioned to them that the elephants can't fly in this one, but it's you take the magic out and you take the flying stuff out and the crazy stuff, and you've got essentially an ancients war game, and they're using it. So the game still has legs. It's still out there. They're still supporting it. So you can look up Chipko on Facebook, and he'll set you up with it if you want to get a copy of it. But I have to say that the two guys that wrote this have more talent than the entire design studio at Games Workshop, because as far as games go, this game is light years beyond anything that I've ever played from Games Workshop. But Games Workshop has the background, the fluff, and the artwork. Here's a picture of the flying mammoth and the chasm in the ground counter. Both very well played. Good use of their magic users. Here is some images of the breakthrough of the chariots into the second line of cavalry. It was a mess. The mobs in the back, goblins, here they are with the giant, and you can see the hand weapons approaching them. They get closer. Eventually, they just massacre them once they get there, because goblin mobs are just really, there's a lot of them, but they're not very tough. I don't even think that the barbarians got any wounds at all. The giant in the spider was not doing too well. He got poisoned quite a bit. So Snake Plissken flies again and lands to help fight off some of the light cavalry. Pretty bold move on his part. There he is standing on top there, waving his snake around. It was a good move to try to save the giant, but and then it was in vain. The giant succumbed to the poison and died, and Snake Plissken, in fact, had his mammoth killed, and he himself lost his life in this valiant attempt to turn the tide. But this was, something that was kind of happened. The orcs kind of turned the tide a little bit, but it was a little too late. The shaman, the earth shaman, managed to summon a couple elementals and bring them in, and started doing some damage, but their command control fell apart and the game ended. So that was about it. So I want to balance out with some negative things that people may or may not like about this system. As I said before, there isn't really any lore. You can plug it into anything, but you have to do that yourself. And there are a lot of abstractions in the rules that at first might seem difficult. There's, you're used to maybe 3-4 different types of armor, a couple different kinds of this or that, and everything's just kind of folded in. The missile rules too, especially, you think, well, there's no variation between javelins, crossbows, or whatever. So it seems that they're very weak in that regard, but the abstractions kind of work, and the end result is something that functions as a game. The other thing is whether or not this game can be broken. Most games can be broken if you try hard enough. A lot of professional, large corporation type games are broken about 30 minutes after they're published by an 11-year-old with an internet connection. This game is hard to break. It can be broken, but it's hard because there's such a counter for everything. There's a paper, rock, scissors. I think the worst combination is an alchemist riding an undead dragon wearing heavy armor with a magic ward. That's pretty tough. It can be done. You pretty much need flying berserkers to take it out. But that's an extreme example, and just don't play with that guy. But it works pretty good as it is. So if you can kind of handle some of the abstraction and use your own imagination, you might like it. If not, and you want a lore-rich game, then this isn't for you. Speaking of undead, the undead rules don't really work in my opinion. They're just too tough. However, if they go up against a good cleric, they suddenly become very weak. And that's just kind of strange. They're either unbeatable or unwinnable. I don't like that. We made some modifications, a couple little tweaks here and there, but it works pretty good. So there you have it. I like it. Most of the people that I know have liked playing it. Some don't because they want the lore, and I understand that. I like my Warhammer setting, and I like my Dan Abnett books and everything like that. But this is just a good generic game that you can plug in anywhere. So thanks for watching, everybody.